I want to welcome both of you, Eamon Butler and Lord Green, for coming up to Scotland and joining us for this evening's event by the Asia Scotland Institute. We're looking forward very much to hearing what you have to say later on this evening as we talk about Adam Smith's influence and connection with China, and indeed what's going on in China at the moment. So I'm very grateful to you both. And perhaps we could start with you, Eamon, just talking about the key points you're going to touch on this evening.
Well, since we're meeting in the Canongate Church, it seems appropriate to talk about Adam Smith, because Adam Smith was a regular worshipper there, and he lived in a house just around the corner, and died, indeed, in a house just around the corner. And he, of course, was one of the principal leaders of the Scottish Enlightenment, along with David Hume and others, who really led Scotland's renaissance intellectually and put Scotland back on the intellectual map. And he was a very interesting man. He wasn't the first economist in the world, but he was a pioneering economist. He was a systematizer of all of the information that people had been collecting. He made it into a system. And one of his most important insights is that both sides actually benefit from a trade. It's not just the seller, it's not just the person who gets the money that benefits. Both sides benefit. And so his view was that you should have free trade, not try to increase your exports and diminish your imports in order to get more money. But if you actually went for free trade, that would benefit both sides. And that, of course, 50 years later led really to the creation of the 19th century great era of free trade. But the second interesting thing, and he was a philosopher as well as an economist, the second interesting thing is that he believed that a society could fundamentally run itself, that you didn't need all of the trappings of a big inflated government in order to do things. If you just let what he called the system of natural liberty take effect, then it's as if by an invisible hand your society would be smooth and harmonious. So a very great man.
In the context of China, which we're going to be looking at, he had a few things to say about that, and indeed the Chinese themselves view him as something of an icon.
Yes, the many Chinese leaders carry either The Wealth of Nations or Theory of Moral Sentiments, his two great books, with them, and they do seem to know a lot about Adam Smith and are interested in his ideas. I think his ethical philosophies as well as his economic views. He didn't write much about China, and he never went there himself, of course, but he did write that China for some centuries now, this is writing in 1776, seems to have been static. That it hasn't progressed at all. And he says the reason for that is its laws and institutions which don't encourage private action and accumulation of capital and so on. So there may be some lessons for the Chinese in that today.
But turning, Lord Green, to you, thank you also for being here back again. In the context of what we're going to talk about this evening, China, its supposed economic crisis, even of course the links with Adam Smith. Could you give us an idea of the points you're going to touch on later this evening?
Essentially, I want to argue that we need to take a longer term view of what's going on in China and not be overly dominated by the impression created by the current headlines, which would have you believe that China is in turmoil, that its economy is in disarray, and indeed that the social fabric may be under some threat of unravelling. There is no doubt that there are some significant challenges. There is no doubt that the Chinese growth model that used to depend heavily on exports and then more latterly on exports and heavy levels of investment is not sustainable. And that they need, for a variety of reasons, but including monetary financial balance, as well as meeting the fundamental needs of an increasingly prosperous nation, to rebalance their economy towards more services, more domestic consumption. Achieving that transition is a tricky one, and it may well be that in the course of the transition they will have to accept lower levels of growth than they've been used to. But I believe that it's important to look at China over a much longer period in the way that they themselves do. The Chinese government, the Chinese leadership, think in terms of 2049. That may seem a date that doesn't particularly mean anything to us, but it's the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. They will want to be able to demonstrate to the Chinese people that the leadership has achieved a modernization, a transformation, a growing prosperity broadly spread through the nation. They will want to be able to demonstrate that China has taken its place on the world stage, its place in the sun, to use a phrase once used by Germany as it was gaining its position in the 19th century. And in order to do that, they will quite cleverly orchestrate what they need to do to get all this done. This does not mean that there won't be bumps on the way, but they do have the advantage over many other emerging markets of this reasonably consistent long-term view of where they're headed. It is, of course, not an elective democracy. That helps insofar as it has many issues, of course, but it helps insofar as they're able to take a longer-term perspective. There are some challenges they need to address. They need to tackle the state-owned enterprises, which are large businesses that deploy capital incredibly inefficiently, and in order to raise productivity, in order to help rebalancing, there are some definite challenges that they've got to face up to. I think the best assumption is that they know what they need to do. Some of these things are undoubtedly difficult and socially challenging, but it would be unwise to assume that China is about to implode at all. On the contrary, I think China is going to perform reasonably well over the next few decades. And for British and other European businesses, the implications of that are clear. If you take the long-term perspective, you go on developing your business in China because this is a large market. It will continue to grow, and growth of average of 5%, supposing that were to be the case for the next 10 years. Well, viewed from a European perspective or from a Japanese perspective, that's not bad and creates plenty of opportunity.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your very interesting comments. We look forward to hearing more this evening when there'll be questions and I know very interesting answers. And again, I can't thank you enough for making the effort to come up to Scotland for this evening's event of the Age of Scotland Institute. Thank you.
Thank you.